There we
Okay.
go. All right.
Hello,
So,
everyone.
hello. Thank you for coming out to uh, college level writing expectations the first.
Mhm.
Um, we've got our lovely information about 21st Century Scholars Summer Learning Institute here with all of the, how to do Zoom. Any questions on that before we dive in? Looking at the chat. Okay, gonna go with no on that.
Yeah,
So,
so and we will say that for those of you who are present right now, feel free to use the chat. We both have it up. So if you don't want to speak, we will be keeping an eye on any questions you have throughout. So if anything strikes you at any point, just feel free to write it down and we'll address it as soon as we can.
but we're also gonna make you talk. So,
Yes,
bad
that will
luck with
also
that.
happen in a few moments.
All right. Zoom bingo time. Can you all see this screen?
Thumbs up or some sort of indicator.
Yes? Yes.
Yes, there you
Perfect.
go.
All right. Excellent. Cool. So, um, as you know, with any of these meetings, we're going to start with an introduction. So we'll go first, and then it's going to be your turn. You're welcome. So I'm Jennifer. I'm a graduate student here at IU in English. I'm also a graduate tutor at Writing Tutorial Services, who's doing this session. As a person in English, I've been writing for multiple years, and then I've also taught W131, which is the first year composition course here at IU, and different versions of it. My favorite thing about moving to college writing is that we got rid of the hooks in the introduction section. I hated trying to come up with those because it was like, yes, have something that is pithy and going to get your reader interested and introduces them to the topic, but doesn't give too much away. But it's also brought, there were just so many rules. It was really hard. So I was really not happy when you could just get rid of those. The biggest challenge moving to college writing was the idea that ideas structure paragraphs more than we're going to do a 3-part thesis. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. Matthew, who are you?
Who am I? Well, as you just said, I'm Matthew. You've given it all away. I'm Matthew Pollock. So I am a graduate student in Spanish and linguistics. I'm also a grad tutor here at WITS, and that's why I'm also here at this session. And then I guess my favorite thing about moving to college writing was the chance to kind of broaden. I feel like with every passing year in college, you get more and more of a chance to write about the things that you care about and interest you. So as you are in your first year, you have some choices. By the time you get to your fourth year, you're writing about things that are really important to you and really engage you. And I feel like in high school, oftentimes it was, here's the text you're writing about, here's the prompt you're going to write on, do it now. And there wasn't really any room for differences of analysis, interpretation. The biggest challenge, I feel like it's always very difficult to figure out when you have researched enough on certain topics. So if you're supposed to be looking up, for example, why this one song is really good, or why this text is more effective in the way it's doing something than this other text, you usually have to look for at least a couple of other sources that help support your point in some way. And so once you've found one source or two sources, is that enough? Maybe a third source will help more. And then once you've got the third, well, maybe there's a fourth source out there, and you just keep on looking and trying to figure out, when do I have enough? When do I call it a day? That can be hard.
Yeah, also with the so what, same thing.
Yeah.
Definitely. All right, awesome. So we're going to move this over to our wonderful participants now. So as you are comfortable, you can share audio. You can type in on the chat. You can do audio and video, whatever you are most comfortable with. But your name, let's go with where you're from, just for funsies. Funsies being the technical term, of course. And then what your favorite part of writing is and what your least favorite part or the biggest challenge is. Oh, yes. Thank you. Oh, yeah. And if you have a major declared, then sure, we can do that. If you don't, no worries. Something you're interested in, maybe. All right. Yes. So Matthew has kindly put the questions in the chat. So who would like to go first? Just gonna stare awkwardly. someone talks.
I guess I'll go first.
All right.
My name is Java.
Hey, Java.
I'm from here in Bloomington, Indiana. I'm gonna major exercise science.
Nice.
Favorite part of writing is, I guess when like we are reading a book or watching a movie and then we get to write about it.
Yeah, totally.
The second part, would be like, multiple page essays.
Right. It's like, well, how do I get to that page range, right? Yeah.
That's hard.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Miguel. I'm from Sherville, Indiana, which is in the Northwest, and like close to Gary. And I'm going to get, or looking to get a bachelor's in human biology.
Ooh.
And my favorite part of writing would probably be like the sort of like when it just sort of captivates you, and like when either it's like freehand or like it's about a subject you're really interested in, and you just can like, it feels like you can keep writing for hours. And
Yes.
least favorite is probably just like, I don't know, I guess it would be sort of like the example you gave where it's like really strict, it has to be in a certain way, and like how just like the structuring like writing, I'm not like that proficient at, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
one of
absolutely.
one of the good things with structuring writing is that it is a sort of learned skill that you kind of have to pick up, but once you learn it, you have it down.
Right. But yeah, I mean, totally. Like the feeling of like being in that groove of like, oh yeah, like all the ideas are just flowing. Oh my God, so great. But yeah, like that, the having a certain structure to fit into can definitely stifle that for sure. Right. Thank you so much for sharing. We're gonna now ask you to share a little. Oh, actually, no, we're gonna preview this first. Sorry.
Yeah.
So our plan for today. So we've got essentially 2 weeks to talk to you all about moving to college writing. So what we're doing today is kind of the beginning of the process. So it's like, all right, we're getting the prompt. How do we even start to dissect? You're welcome, Miguel. Take apart the prompt. What is it even asking for? How are some ways to approach it? We'll talk about if it requires external sources to the course, some ideas of how to get, how to find those and how to potentially assess them. Thesis statements, which is basically just, your main claim, your main argument. What are we talking about? And those are very important in writing in high school, but especially at the college level. So we'll spend some time with that. And we'll also talk about outlining, which some people hate, some people love. It's a very personal thing, but we'll just do a quick overview of that. And hopefully we'll take a look at a sample paper, and we'll talk about how to revise it to preview for next week when we get into drafting and revising. Matthew, did I miss anything about our plan?
No, I think that's our plan for the next 2 weeks. And so next week, it'll be next Thursday again from 2 to 4.
Yes. Yeah, we are. The Thursdays for today and next week. So. So anyway, so that's what we're planning on doing, but we also want to make sure that we cover any questions or concerns that you have in addition to, the challenges that you just shared with us. So we've got a poll, whoops, not that, at poll everywhere. You can either log into the URL right here, or you can text the number if that is something that you would prefer to do. It is completely anonymous. You can respond as many times as you want, and we will circle back to those questions at the end. I'm actually going to stop sharing this for just a second so I can check on that and see also how much I can preview. So Matthew, you talk while I go check. I also want to make sure that it's working.
All right, yeah, so as Jennifer said, this is essentially, it's a little bit more private since there are only 2 of you. It's not, you are slightly more anonymous, I guess, but we know it's one of the 2 of you.
It could be multiple from one person. You never know.
That's my point, is that, you can freely ask any questions, and we will gladly answer those at the very end. We will also try. What's that?
Is it working? people also? Can you access it, or is it being like, no, this doesn't exist? It uses that tone of voice.
Yeah. Try and send along at least one sample question. Yes, okay. Yeah, but so
perfect.
Essentially we are also going to try and stop after every slide and give you all the chance to ask questions. If you have writing experiences you want to share, we'd be glad to hear those. If you have, writing concerns or other things, as we go through sort of step by step, things that are new, things that are very familiar, feel free to let us know either on the poll, in the chat, or in voice. So in just a moment, I guess we will start up talking about the structure of an essay. And this sort of two-part series, both today and next week, should kind of guide you in all the major steps on how to get from an assignment sheet and a sort of general writing goal to sort of outlining, preparing, and then at the very end, having a revision session and having a finished essay. We're also going to talk a little bit at the end about visiting WITS and what we can do on campus, or for now, we're also on Zoom. So once the semester starts up, for example, you could come make an appointment with us. They're hour-long appointments, but we'll talk about all that near the end. Any luck, Jennifer?
Yes, we have one thing that I, of course, cannot see properly because there is a help pane that is being very unhelpful. Right, okay. I think it is something about how to improve writing in general and practice and things like that. I will continue working on that later on in our question section so that I can properly see the full response. But yeah, so I'll be active if questions occur to you and you don't want to share them in any of the ways that Matthew just outlined. Please feel free to utilize that because again, it is fully anonymous. So huzzah. All right. Yeah, because it's still in the chat and whatnot. All right. So first thing we want to emphasize is that writing is a skill like any other. And so sometimes what folks will talk about is you wouldn't go into a gym, and these days, properly social distanced, of course, and start lifting 100 pounds right away. You would build up to it, just like with any other skill. And so writing's the same way. No one's born a good writer. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of practice in different ways, different like strength training plus cardio, for example. This is for you, Java. Exercise science. No, I'm kidding. Also hum bio, but it's something that takes time. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's something that everyone is like kind of sucks at for a while, and everyone's gone through that stage. And you just practice and keep on going. So this is a graphic I took from the internet. That is not a proper citation. We'll talk about citations next week. This is from the internet though. So essentially it's how one learns a skill or gains a skill. And so with college, usually we're in the bottom of this graphic. We're starting to learn about different skills and we're starting to get a little bit more competent. Then we're moving up into that top right quadrant.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And I would say too, I know that I've seen at the Writing Center, a lot of people come in and are very down on themselves and say, I'm just not a good writer. I don't write well. And they see it as sort of like this innate trait that they just don't have and other people do. And I think that one of the key things about the Writing Center and what we can offer and the way that our philosophy about writing works is that you will sort of develop as a writer over the course of your 4 years in college, over the course of, whatever it is you end up doing in your life, writing will be a part of it. It may not be writing essays, but it may be writing lab reports. It may be writing up sort of patient documents. So the way that you write is something that you will get better and better at until you will work your way sort of around that graphic until you make it to just unconsciously being very competent at writing.
Yeah. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Go for it.
just like with any of the other skills that you're learning in labs or anything else. And it's not, so it's even just feeling like a bad writer. First of all, everyone's felt that. I felt that yesterday. But it's something that is a set of skills and a set of expectations, and it's something that that we get better at with practice and with time.
Yeah, exactly.
So also, I will say the bottom of this graphic is a very uncomfortable place to be, because you're like, I know this isn't great and I don't know how to fix it. And so that's where meeting with other people can be really helpful. At WITS, going to a professor's office hours. Office hours can be kind of scary because you're like, I don't want to be the person who needs help.
But everyone needs help.
Exactly. Everyone needs help. As an instructor, I love office hours. Like, I want students to come talk to me if they're confused, if they're challenged. Like, it's not a mark against them. I'm really happy when students are like, yeah, could we just go over this? I'm like, yes, please. Thank you. Thank you for it's like, reaching out. Everyone needs to reach out. So
I would say as instructors, we are not by any means perfect. So if something is not clear to you, chances are it's not clear to other people in the class.
Yes.
And there's some way that we can possibly address it either in the office hours or in the classroom to try and, help you understand it in a different way, because everybody learns differently. Everybody develops differently.
Yeah. And same thing with WITS. Sometimes, WITS is WTS. It stands for Writing Tutorial Services. There is sometimes a perception that only bad writers go to WITS, which is absolutely not true. We see writers at every stage, and all kinds of writers at every stage in this graphic. So yeah, it is something that you grow more proficient at over time, which I know it would be so much easier if there was a magic formula and suddenly you are the best writer ever. But unfortunately, it does not work that way. So
it doesn't.
But with time and practice, hooray. Questions so far? Ooh, there's something on the chat. What does it say? Oh, yes, that's our website. Yes, thank you, Lisa.
That is our website down there.
All right, questions so far? All right, advance the slides. Okay, awesome. So this is by no means comprehensive, and I want to stress that people's experiences with high schools are different. Different high schools are different. Ontology. No, high schools are different, curricula are different, people are different. So this is a very reductive look at the move, but this is also some of the main differences between expectations of writing at the high school and the college level. So I want to acknowledge this is not true for everything and everyone. This is a general pattern. Okay, cool. So that being said, often in high school, writing is done to show that you have done the work and have understood it. And so sometimes it can be a review of what's been said in class, what's been said in the readings. Basically, we're just kind of taking that stuff and remolding it and giving it back to the teacher. And not always, but often. And the main way of structuring that is the 5-paragraph essay. And so this is what I was talking about before. You start with the pithy hook. And then you have your 3-part thesis. It's I argue that cupcakes are delicious because they are sugary and sweet and full of sprinkles. Yeah, and cake. And then each of your 3 paragraphs is on one of those topics. And then you end by restating the thesis and then maybe asking a question. Who knows what conclusions do? It depends. And so when we're moving to college writing, and this process can happen gradually, et cetera, we are thinking less about giving back the ideas that we were taught, and we're starting to take those ideas and make them our own. And so it's a kind of a shift of seeing what's taught in class as a jumping off point, as opposed to something to be reflected back to the instructor. And so this is where your ideas and your arguments and your interpretations really take center stage. And then in terms of structure, that's what then structures the paper. And so like you might end up with 5 paragraphs total, and like that's okay, but we want to be thinking about that structure being driven by the ideas as opposed to the ideas being driven by the structure. So instead of trying to be like, okay, I need to get my exactly 3 things out of this lesson, instead thinking like, okay, here are my ideas. What is the most logical way to organize them, to walk my reader through how this argument works?
And it shouldn't be a bad thing at times to be creative with the way that you're structuring your essay if the sort of text or the argument you're making demands it.
Yes. I mean, sometimes the prompt will specify organization. That is relatively rare. Relatively. And also, yeah, this one varies by field. Often the writing is going to involve analysis as opposed to proving. In high school, I think a lot of the rhetoric is like, yes, you will now prove that cupcakes are delicious because they are sugary, sweet, and filled with sprinkles, whatever my really bad example was. With a lot of college writing, we're shifting from necessarily proving to proving through analysis. So we're saying like, okay, let me talk about how this category of sweet even works. Let's think about what goes into that. And through that, I will get to proving this part of my argument. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I know it's probably pretty abstract right now.
I would ask at this point, so Miguel and Java, have you had this sort of experience in your high school so far? Do you feel like this, what Jennifer's been talking about with college writing, is significantly different or kind of familiar?
I would say so, yeah. Like the high school, like the way it's sort of formatted, it's like very like, I don't know, it almost tells you what to do.
Yeah, the template to fill in, right?
Yeah.
Which I also want to stress. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I think that was him leaving.
Okay. I want to stress the 5-paragraph essay is not like inherently bad, and in fact, sometimes it is the most logical structure to respond to an assignment or a prompt. The idea with college writing is that we are not restricted to only the 5-paragraph model. So I just wanted to make sure. Okay. Java, does any of this sound familiar to you?
Yeah, low.
Any questions so far? No, we're good. Okay, cool. All right. Cool. All right. So, once we're getting into writing, we've got to set the stage. We've got to essentially give ourselves the circumstances and the room to help us succeed / do the best that we can. So, we want to have done all the readings, even just skimming them, getting an idea of what they're saying. Review notes from class, review notes on your readings. Sometimes instructors will talk about annotating texts. Essentially, that's just like highlighting or underlining important points, but it can also include taking notes and summarizing things like in the margins, and that can be really helpful for exactly this stage of the writing, where instead of having to go back and reread the entire thing, you can just look over your notes and be like, oh, right, that's what this was about. That's the type of evidence this person was using. I know it's really hard, but try to give yourself adequate time to essentially both draft and then revise. And we'll talk about this again next week. But I mean, life happens. Sometimes it is going to be the situation where like, oh crap, it's due in 2 hours, but that does not produce the best writing or, own mental state, because then it's just very, very stressful. And so with everything happening in the world, let's try to be extra kind to ourselves and give ourselves some extra time to get things done. So I used to give myself an internal deadline of like a week before the rough draft was due, I would start. And maybe that start would be like the outline, and then I'd do like a paragraph a day, depending. Maybe it'd be, 5 days before, and I'd be like, I'm just going to draft the whole thing. But, try to schedule it out, Google Calendar, iCal, or whatever, and try to work backward from the deadline, which we'll talk about in 2 seconds with the assignment sheet. So, and then, of course, reading and reviewing the assignment sheet. Ideally, the assignment sheet has all of the essential information. It is what, when you bring your draft to WITS, we will ask for, because that's the primary way we have of accessing your instructor's expectations. That being said, sometimes instructors embellish on the assignment sheet in class. And so that's where the step one of reviewing your notes comes in real handy. And also sometimes taking notes like on the assignment sheet can be really useful as well.
And I would also say, with respect to giving yourself adequate time, if we go back to that metaphor of writing as a skill, just like weightlifting or some sort of sport, if you need to write, so you want to write and prepare and give yourself the chance to do it, it would be the same as saying you had to lift a 100-pound weight 3 times. And instead of doing that, you just lift a 300-pound weight once. It's a lot more work on you to try and get it all done within the last 6 hours before it's due than it is to try and give yourself a couple of steps.
Or it's like, yes, the marathon is tomorrow. Yeah. I
will do my first practice run tonight.
Yes. Again, can be done, but is extra difficult. And
for your own well-being, probably best to avoid it.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's a goal sometimes that's just not going to work out. And then that's an opportunity to try again next time.
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right, so assignment sheets. We'll turn this over to Miguel and Java. So thinking about assignment sheets that you've seen before, like what goes into an assignment sheet or a description of an assignment, and thinking about what we were talking about with that kind of move to college writing, what might you expect from an assignment sheet here in college? And you can put that again in the chat or share with voice, voice and video.
I would be glad to read it out loud if you do want to write and you don't feel like speaking. Oh.
Nope. Sorry. I clicked in the wrong place. Hooray, Zoom.
Yeah. So, like thinking back to my senior year, one of the assignment we had was where it was basically we had to pick a topic we were interested in and like had to either be against it or for it. To do that, we would have to have like a certain amount of like information on it, like a certain amount of links, credible links, and just like sort of our own ideas basically and like that. And I feel like for college it might be similar to that, where it's like you get a bit more freedom, but I also feel like it'll be a lot more in depth, and that the resources you have for not only writing it, but just like the overall experience will be like much greater. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
I would totally agree with that. I do you want to continue to respond, but I also don't want to cut off Java if you wanted to also respond. Or I can just respond.
For me, my class did we mostly read like a lot of poems or books and things like that. And we had to pick like a character or a setting or a story to like talk about. And then sometimes when we do our papers, after that we do another paper like elaborating on the other paper. It's like exactly like college, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you both illustrated some very common genres, especially like I think in high school, the majority of the writing is in English class. And so it's like trace the imagery in Nathaniel Hawthorne, which it's fine. Hawthorne's fine. But yeah, I think you're both exactly right that oftentimes it will be, the prompts will be both more directed and more broad. Hooray. So it'll be focused in on the class in some ways, but there will also often be a greater degree of freedom. So Miguel, like you were saying, like pick something that's you find interesting, like that can definitely happen, especially at like the junior and senior level, of just like pick a prompt related to our class and write an essay about it. Have fun. With first and second year writing, it tends to be a little bit more directed so that we build to there. But yeah, often it'll be using sources from class and potentially pulling in some external sources and just, yeah, creating your own take on it. Matthew, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think that sounds about right. And I think that also in the first couple of years in college, you'll probably have sort of English-based writing classes. And as you go into your majors, you're going to have a different sort of writing that you're kind of learning based on some of the skills you pick up in classes like 131. So you learn how to create a thesis, create an essay early on. And then when you go on to become, for me, a linguist, or for Miguel, a biologist, you know, once you go into some of these sort of subgroups that exercise science or biology or something, they will have their own sort of norms, but you'll have those skills of reading an assignment sheet, sort of getting the topic together, doing research that will support you.
Yeah. Despite the discipline, at its heart, it's all about, you know, here's my point and here's the evidence to support my point. And yeah, with exercise science and hum bio, it might go more along the lines of the scientific method of like, here's my hypothesis and my method and my results and my discussion, but it's all the same thing. I will also say, I don't know if you all are going to be taking 131 either in the fall or the spring or beyond, but unlike English class in high school, there's a lot less of like, let's look at imagery and symbolism, and a lot more, let's think critically about books and TV shows. Kinds of things. So if you hated imagery and you're worried about that for 131, you do not need to. In like a lit class, potentially, but all right. All right. Questions so far? Nope. Okay, yeah, so we're going to look at an assignment sheet. This is one of my assignment sheets that I created for a class I taught a few years back. So 131 is first year composition. So it's kind of the introduction to how to write at the college level. This was a version essentially of that class that focused on what is a witch in popular culture mostly. So heads up about that. And we're just going to break it down. As we go through it, what we want you to be thinking about is how it might compare to other types of assignment sheets that you've seen, and how, and essentially just be thinking about that. So, cool. It was difficult to move into the PowerPoint, so we're going to take a look at it in sections. So this is like, imagine this is the top bit of your like 8 by 11. With 131 assignment sheets in particular, this is going to be the basic structure. So you'll have your lovely header at the top. This is a stock image. It is not mine, not my copyright, etc. You'll have the title of the assignment. Sometimes, like, I feel like sometimes titles get overlooked with assignments. I've definitely done that, but it can be helpful when you hit that point in drafting, like, what even is this assignment about? The title is a really good way of thinking about that. So like here, it's creating and defending a definition. That's going to be the heart of this assignment. That is going to be the central thing that this piece of writing needs to accomplish. So description, it gives us the word range, plus works cited page. We've got our sources here. Usually, when sources are given on an assignment sheet, that means that one should not deviate from those sources. So if there's a list of like, here are the things we are going to use from this class, chances are that means don't go and find external sources. Conversely, if the assignment sheet is like, use the definition we've talked about in class and go find your own sources, then you do need to go find those other ones. But like here, I did not want my students to find other things because there's a lot out there, and I wanted to stay focused and also not give them more work. Because Malaya's by itself is hard. It's great, but it's hard. Total points, that can come in different forms. Sometimes classes do the point value and then it's like, it's out of 1,000 points for easy math. You'll also often see like this is 10% of the grade or 15% of the grade or 50% of the grade, who knows. Due date is one of the first places you want to look just in terms of trying to plan out the schedule. So again, trying to remember to give yourself adequate time. So, okay, it's due Tuesday, February 7th. Let me work backward from here and see what else I have scheduled in the weeks leading up to that and where I might be able to fit in drafting. There's a rough draft due in class and then a final draft. So again, trying to find time between those two to revise. So this is basically just the logistics of the thing. And then we get into the actual prompt. So based on texts we've read, create a working definition of a witch and justify your decisions. Definition should be able to be applied to a wide range of witches, which is really hard to say out loud, just for the record. Support your argument with evidence from both time periods we have discussed, pre-modern and modern/New Age. So for background, essentially we had spent about a week and a half on each. So the first two of these sources is like from the pre-modern period, and then the second two are from the modern period. So your evidence should include at least 3 of the 4 sources to back up your argument, even if you use ones to present evidence you ultimately reject. I chose here to underline that part of the prompt because I was worried it would get kind of lost among all of the sentences, but that's not something you'll always see. So as you, I mean, this is a small paragraph, right, of an assignment. So it's like, oh crap, what do I do? First thing you want to do is start looking for keywords. And well, first we look at logistics. And then I start looking at keywords. All right, so first sentence tends to be the most important, but also kind of the broadest. It's like the umbrella, and then we're going to start moving in, like we do with essays, which we'll talk about. So essentially here, we're creating a working definition and justifying it. So we're like, all right, here's my entry in dictionary.com. Sure. And here's why. We want to then, so now we're going to start qualifying that and making sure we get all the other bits. All right, it can be applied to a wide range of witches, so it can't just be one. It's got to be a little bit flexible. And then again, more logistics. So then one of the ways that we can tackle something like this also is rephrasing it in our own words. So I rewrote it as create a definition of a witch based on everything we've read. It should be able to work for witches, including like the Wicked Witch of the West, but also Hermione. Use stuff from both time periods, old and new, and use at least 3 readings out of our 4, even if you're arguing against them. So sometimes if that original prompt is just wacky for some reason, putting in your own words can be really helpful. Matthew, anything to add?
No, I think that, so you will essentially receive a full page sort of prompt as Jennifer said, this is just sort of the top half of it. So it does definitely look a little daunting if you've never seen it before to see just a bunch of text all about an essay that you have to write. But I think this is useful as a way to kind of see it as parts that form a whole and knowing where to look for the key information. So yeah, I think this is good.
Yeah, and taking it section by section can definitely help as well. Often assignment sheets will be structured as like, a section on logistics, a section on like, here's what we're actually doing, maybe more logistics, like here's the formatting I want or the citation style I want. But of course, it varies by instructor. It can vary by field. But these are the main types of sections that you'll see. So speaking of, sometimes there's like a strategy section or like a helpful hints and tricks or tips or something along those lines. It can be really tempting to skip that section because, as Matthew just said, there's so much text on the page and you're just like, whoa, okay, I'll read that later, and then later never happens. I do want to stress though, this section is important. It is, if it's on the assignment sheet, it's there for a reason. And a lot of that reason is that it is your instructor trying to help you align yourself with their expectations. And so very tempting to skip. Do not skip it. So this would be like the middle of the page if we're envisioning, again, our 8 by 11. So here we're like, this part is showing that it's building on our work from short paper 1 and short paper 2 is what SP stands for. So Java, kind of like you were talking about how some of your essays in high school built on each other, same thing. So this is reminding us that, okay, we're not starting from scratch. We're not reinventing the wheel. We are building on the skills and the content that we've been working with for the last however long. And then this is essentially like one process. So you pick 2 to 3 aspects that you think are the most important, start a list of definitions and why you're defining them. Here are the page numbers from our textbook to check. And then this whole second paragraph here is compiled from challenges that I saw in previous assignments. And so these were potential places for extra challenges or potential places where the prompt was not perhaps clear enough. And so I was trying to add in some verification here. So we're pulling everything together. We're not just saying like, ah, yes, a witch is female and evil and I don't know, ugly, the end. We're saying like, okay, why? What does that do for us? What might that imply? Show that these are these key characteristics. Why are we arguing against this one source that we're arguing against? And especially thinking about, yeah, the implications. So like, what does it mean to define a witch in this way and not another? Why, if like Hermione doesn't count in this one, what does that do or show? So yeah, so it's, again, tempting to skip. I highly, highly recommend against skipping it. These can be really, really useful, especially if you're confused and you're like, I don't know what they want. Check for this section. It doesn't always exist, but when it does, give it a look.
The only thing I would add is that, you know, your instructor is trying to help you. So these assignment sheets may be long. I mean, once you've sat down, you've read through everything once or twice, you've made notes on things that you understand and you get and are easy, and other things that you don't remember maybe from class or it doesn't really make sense to you. That's also a good time to possibly stop by your instructor's office hours or stop by after class and just say, hey, I noticed that you mentioned SP2, or I noticed that you mentioned this other thing that we should be reviewing. Where is this? What is this? How do I connect this?
And or almost always, like at the beginning or end of class, your instructor is going to be like, all right, any questions? And if you have a question about the assignment sheet, chances are someone else does too. And you're, you know, doing them a solid by being like, hey, could you clarify this point in the assignment sheet? So, cool. All right. Questions so far? All right, so this is the last part of the assignment sheet, so at the very bottom. So we're talking now about assessment, which is essentially grading, but it's more importantly, how instructors decide the extent to which this piece of writing fulfills the objectives of the assignment. That's essentially what assessment is. So this can take multiple forms. This can be a rubric. This can be a list like this is. Sometimes it doesn't exist, but it often does. So here we have a list with numbers as opposed to like bullet points. And so what that's telling us is that, well, okay, 9 times out of 10, that means that it's in order of importance. And indeed, in 131 at least, whenever it's a numbered list of criteria, it is order of importance. So number 1 is the absolute most important. Number 4 is the least important. Usually, things like grammar, punctuation, formatting, etc., are going to be at the lower end of importance. And that's also why at WITS, usually we will start with things like, what is your argument? How does the evidence support that argument, as opposed to a comma splice? Just because often 9 times out of 10, instructors are going to care more about what your ideas are as opposed to comma splices. There are, of course, exceptions. So just be paying attention to the assignment sheet. Almost always when grammar is an issue or a particular concern of an instructor, they will usually mark that on the assignment sheet, or alternatively, you'll find out when you get their feedback. So, but almost always we want to start with, okay, what are our ideas? Are they clear? Can they be clearer? Things like that. Cool.
And I would say that since we're about 7 minutes away from the end of the first hour, this next slide after this is going to be a sort of practice assignment for you guys. So I think we can move on to that, talk through it a little bit, and then go into the break probably.
Yes, that sounds excellent. So this is an assignment that I have revised. A sample, if you will. And I cut off some of the logistics because I didn't care. So I'm gonna ask you to take a minute to read over it. I'm also happy to read it out loud if that is easier. And then answer these questions again, either out loud or in the chat. So where do you want to focus your attention in this, and why? What's it asking for, and how would you approach answering this? So we will give you a few minutes to read and then begin discussing.
Okay, so just sort of like right away, the first thing I looked at was, well, the first thing that caught my eye was like, your paper should be,
Yeah.
should count, and like the different like I guess requirements. And after that, I sort of started reading like the rest of it.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess at first it should be like, one of the things you should notice is like when it's due and how much you're actually writing. Like if it's due tomorrow and it's not that much, or if it's like, I don't know, 20 pages and it's due in a month or something like that. And I guess from there it's just like, just so like knowing that helps you plan out like what you're gonna do and like when and all of that. And like you said, it's better to do it like for your own state of being or well-being. Sorry. And I guess like the way I would try to approach it is like first to like go over all like the videos or film clips and stuff like that, and to pick them out to sort of find like a common theme between them or something like that, like how it asks
Okay.
like something similar about them, about the examples, and then to I guess go from there and write the
Okay.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Yeah. And Java, you were saying you also read the kind of bulleted points first, and then the rest of it. So yeah, I mean, exactly. Sorry, you were saying. You want to say something? I did not mean to cut you off. No. Okay. Okay. So like you're.
I would just say really quickly that it is interesting that both of you did mention that, because I think that the whole your paper should be and the bullets, it's a lot easier to get into as a reader, whereas seeing a block of text is just, it's a lot of information. Even with the bolds, like my eye is just sort of drawn towards those two bold sections, like, okay, well, here's something to sort of grab onto. But because you have everything bulleted and like those are the key points, that is where you're going to look first. And then possibly one useful way to look into that paragraph, if it is a little bit hard to sort of parse everything, just like Jennifer did before, is to either make a list of like what are the key sort of aspects of this, or to maybe sort of underline things and just make those keywords stick out to you a little bit more if you're going back through it to start prepping.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the bullet points totally draw the eye first, because they're easier on the eyes. And then Miguel, you're also pointing to the due date, which is up here in the rectangle, which is bolded, but then in some ways, because it's with the rest of the bolding, your eye kind of just like skips over it. But yeah, in terms of like the different sections we were thinking about, your paper should be, what type of information is that? Is that the logistics, the prompt, or the assessment, or the strategies?
It's the logistics, right?
Yeah, it's totally logistics. And so then, yeah, the paragraph would be like the prompt. So I know we're going to take a break in just a minute. Before we do, I'm going to ask both of you to, in like however many sentences you want, rewrite this prompt in your own words. What is this asking you to do? Does that sound doable?
Yeah.
Got it.
You wanted to like type it out in the chat?
Yeah, is that cool?
Yeah. Okay.
In like the real world, this would be like in your notes or on the PDF or physical paper if we're ever in person again.
But it's good to be able to see the chat and share it.
Yeah. And it does not need to be like academic or anything. Like you can use colloquialisms, you can use emoji if you want. Like we are putting this in terms that you understand and makes sense to you. So let's try to move our drafts into that chat in the next minute or two, and then we will take a break once we reflect on that. And it does not need to be like the most perfect paraphrase in the world. It's the draft. All of writing is drafting. All right, Miguel. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. Yep. Nice. Yeah, and I actually, oh wait, I gave us draft before I respond, but. Java, are you with us? How's it going? I always feel like a preacher or like someone doing a seance when I do that. Like, are you with us? Like I should have like a Ouija board or something. Ah, there it is. Yeah. Awesome. Yep. Hello, Vince. All right, so Vince, we are just finishing up an exercise and about to take a break. But welcome. Okay, so I love these paraphrases. They're so cool. Yeah, if you brought this into WITS, my first question would be, did your instructor talk about if it's one scene or multiple scenes? Because there's a little bit of wiggle room in interpretation on that assignment sheet. But absolutely, we're thinking about the themes of hero and heroism, stuff we've talked about in class. We're picking out something from something that you've watched for class, and we're thinking about how that is defining or exemplifying those characteristics of stuff we've done in class. And as Miguel noted, on time within the word count. This assignment is specifying that you cannot go over the upper limit. Often there's a little bit of wiggle room unless it's stated otherwise, which it is here. So how was that process of rephrasing or paraphrasing? You can put in the chat or speak or whatnot.
It was actually my first time ever doing something like that.
Okay. So I'm guessing it was a little go for it.
Sorry. Yeah, I was just saying that it does seem like a good strategy to do, though.
Yeah, and like especially if it's your first time, it might be really uncomfortable. But yeah, sometimes it can just really help break it down.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I think we should probably take a break now. We'll be back around 3:10 or so.
All right, so yes, we can actually, Matthew and I will probably also go mute and invisible. So breathing, stretch, bathroom, snack, etc. We will reconvene at 10 after. All right, it is 3:10. You can
Hello.
hear my voice. Return to your device that you are accessing Zoom on, through which you are accessing Zoom. Yes, anyway. Yes, could I get a thumbs up from everyone to show we are back?
Hey.
Yes, perfect. Okay, cool. Back to our PowerPoint. So yes, thank you so much for participating in our paraphrasing activity. Again, that can just be a way of approaching these kind of longer form prompts. So, all right, so sometimes, like I mentioned before, you'll be asked to bring in sources from outside of the course. And so oftentimes those are going to be sources that need to be reliable. So not your cousin Bob's blog. Like, no offense to cousin Bob.
He writes a really good blog.
You know, yeah, we're not here to judge cousin Bob's blog. Another tongue twister, but it's fine. Oftentimes your assignment will ask you for essentially reliable sources. That often involves being peer reviewed, which basically means it goes through a process where the publication sends it to usually 2 experts in the field, and they pretty much just fact check it. And if something is glaringly wrong or if the methodology is off, they're like, no, and then it doesn't get published. So it's kind of like what you do in class, where you like look at each other's papers and you're like, maybe not, except at the academic publishing level. So usually for things like that, you'll be looking for articles in academic journals, sometimes newspaper articles from various sources, and that can be fascinating in itself because you're like, ooh, okay, which way does this publication lean? What does that say about how this article is formatted? There's one assignment from, I think, the media school that asked students to compare and contrast 2 articles on the same event from different outlets. So cool. So it'd be something like that. Chapters in a book. Yeah, so essentially then, oh no, where do I go? On the IU Library's website, if you scroll all the way down, right in the middle, there's something called One Search at IU, which it basically brings together a whole bunch of databases into one search engine. So it's kind of like Google, but for a lot of academic databases. You could also go to, why did I do MLA? Okay, it's fine. You could also go to JSTOR, Google Scholar. Essentially, the librarians at Wells know where everything is, and they can help direct you. There's a chat function, I believe, on the library website.
I'll just add, so as far as the librarians, once we are back in person on campus, you will be able to actually go there, search the stacks. So there are a lot of something
or
like
page pickup.
Well, yes. I mean, even now, I think we're working our way back towards pickup, but there are somewhere near 1 million books in possession at Wells Library. So you will have access to a lot of paper books, but then there's also a lot of really cool online sources. And I would say so one thing about this as well, and under this who can help sort of column, we have WITS, which is us. We also have the Learning Commons research assistants. One other group that we don't mention here is professors, because as you are working your way into this, as you saw with some of these early assignment sheets, you're going to have like all of the sources often given to you early on. And then the further you go into the classes, the more you're going to be expected to start to find these things for yourself. So this is kind of anticipating where you might be mid-semester this fall or maybe next spring.
Yeah, exactly. These research projects usually are final projects or something along those lines.
Right.
So we wanted to highlight 2 of the resources for finding sources. One of them is the research assistants. So these are librarians in training who work very closely with us. They're amazing. They're great. Again, in person, they have a little desk right outside our WITS area, but we're working with what we've got. So they help navigate databases, thinking about where to find things, how to evaluate sources to see if they're reliable. If like, you know, music is auto-playing on that website, maybe it's not the most credible. I know that's not really a thing anymore, but it used to be, I promise. And they can even help you start to draft your thesis statement based on that. At WITS, we can also do that. We can talk through like how the source is helping you support your argument, how you might be able to work it into your paper, and then both of us can talk about citation as well. So in this process, none of us are going to guarantee that we know everything about the source that you've chosen, but explaining it to someone else is also a really great way to check your own understanding and make sure that you're reviewing the key points.
One small addition for the RAs, I'm not 100% sure yet if they're going to be online this coming semester. If there is some way to access them, they should have some sort of Zoom meetings available. And I did put the link in the chat.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so thesis statements. Essentially, to get to that point, we've got to do a lot of what we just did a few minutes ago, which is, okay, what is the question that we're answering from this prompt? And then there's like the pre-writing stage is like, okay, like what is my answer to that question, and what's the evidence that I want to use to support that answer? And then you'll think about, okay, what's the most logical sequence for that? So like if one of the points depends on another one, we got to start with the first one and then the one that depends on it, because if we do it the other way around, it doesn't make sense. And then that's going to be distilled into your thesis statement. So thesis statement, big scary phrase, gets used sometimes quite a lot, sometimes just like, oh yeah, of course you'll have a thesis statement. And then sometimes you're like, oh, what? Essentially, a thesis statement is your main claim, your main argument, your governing argument. Like these are all interchangeable. It is what is the point that you are trying to make. It's called a thesis statement and not a thesis sentence because it can be more than one sentence. And often, especially as your ideas get more complex and you're pulling in more sources, it's going to need to be more than one sentence. Oftentimes it's going to be two parts. It'll be like the smaller bit. This is my own terminology, which is why it is not the most academic of phrasing, but like it's the small bit. So in like high school writing, this would be the imagery of nature, for example. Here's the bit of ethos that I want to be tracking. And then there's the larger idea. So like then how does that fit into the larger text? So how does Hawthorne use the imagery of nature in the Scarlet Letter? Tells you how, it's fine. I'm not mad at how Hawthorne spoils all my analytical fun, it's fine. But yeah, so often it's two parts. So that can be summed up in one sentence, but sometimes it can't be. So it does not make a big difference about whether it is one sentence or not. And then it's essentially the roadmap for the rest of the essay. So ideally, after reading your thesis statement, the reader knows what you're going to be arguing and then what order the ideas are in. So they're like, yes, we will be talking about this and then this, then this, then this. Does that make sense? Questions so far?
And so this will usually appear in your first paragraph at near the end of it as a sort of guideline, having talked about sort of the broader ideas that are mentioned in the prompt, and then getting into the thesis to guide you in the rest of your analysis.
Yeah, 9 times out of 10, it is, well, the academic convention is that it is the end of your first paragraph. So the last sentence or 2 sentences, that's where your reader is going to expect it. Right. That can vary for like lab assignments, but even still, often it's going to be on like the first page. So, as one of my writing teachers put it, do not throw your reader a surprise party. You want the argument front and center. So. All right, so a couple of do's and don'ts, and then we'll visualize that in the next slide. at the end of the day, your thesis statement is an argument. And so one of the biggest challenges with thesis statements is moving from an observation or a summary or a declaration of what one is going to argue into the argument itself. So we don't need phrases like "I will argue," because the assumption is that you're just going to do that. So instead of saying something like "I will demonstrate how this is going to happen," just say how this is going to happen. The litmus test that I use, you bring in all the scientific terminology, is can someone argue against this with evidence? And I say with evidence because that distinguishes an argument from an opinion. Opinions are, they're fine, but we usually don't want them in academic writing. And also in case the person's just grumpy, like maybe I just feel today like I'm going to be like, no, the sky doesn't appear blue to the human eye. It's like, okay, great. But like you don't have evidence to support that. So if someone can argue against it with evidence, chances are we're going in a good direction for the thesis statement. Yeah, and we're connecting it to the evidence that we are using as well. Cool. So based on these do's and don'ts, these are essentially just some questions to be asking. Again, my litmus test. Can someone notice this on the first pass through, like being like, yes, the Avengers films talk about heroism.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, indeed, it's not false, right? But we want to make sure that our argument is something that takes time and effort and thought to get to. We don't want to be using like cliches or proverbs. Yeah, just again, usually there's not really arguments. Like it's hard to argue against with evidence. People fear what they do not understand, right? It's like, no, people love not understanding, right? Like it's going to be hard to find evidence for that. We don't want to just say the counter argument because that's not what we're arguing. Making sure it has a broad base of support, being clear, and making sure that there's at least a move towards the broader implications or what's called the so what, which we'll talk about a little bit more later as well. What I'll say for now is the so what is the hardest but also most exciting part of writing. So essentially it is, why do I care? Why did your instructor assign you this thing? What does it matter? But it's also a hard balance because usually we don't want to go to things like society should be nicer to people. Again, not untrue, but we tend to want to keep it a little bit more hooked in with the text and the evidence that we're talking about. Cool. All right, so.
Examples.
Hooray. So take just a minute to read over these. We'll return to them in a minute. You do not need to memorize them or write them down. I will have done them for you.
Maybe for some,
just.
I was going to say, maybe for simplicity's sake, if Miguel and Java, you both just pick one and maybe talk to us just in maybe 1 or 2 minutes about kind of what you think about the one that caught your eye.
Or 1,002 slides, Matthew.
Oh, okay.
We'll save that.
All right.
Start thinking now. Formulate your thoughts. In a couple minutes, we will call on you. All right, so we're going to take the first example just as something for us to talk through first. So Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet demonstrates that no matter the obstacles, true love conquers all. All right, so we've got a few things going on here. We've got the proverb of true love conquers all. We don't really have a sense of evidence. It's very general, and it's hard for somebody to argue against. Well, someone could argue against this with evidence, but it would take some finagling. So oftentimes with these challenges, the solution is just to go more specific and to dig a little bit deeper with what do I want to be saying about this? What about true love conquers all? Like, what does that say? How is it demonstrating this? Why does that even matter? Things like that. And so then once we integrate those answers, we get a longer, but also more specific and thus more arguable thesis. I think sometimes it's a little bit counterintuitive because you're like, oh, but if I get more specific, then I'm like backing myself into a corner and I don't have as much to talk about. But conversely, actually, once you get more specific, you've got more options open for yourself. So fun times with writing. So one of the drafts or a revision I made, this is not like the one true revision because that doesn't exist, but a revision is William Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet features claims about undying love in order to heighten the tragic outcome. The play does this to highlight the tragedy of the star-crossed lovers and the fact that children had to die to show the foolishness of the feud. So we've got the two-part thesis going on. We've got claims about undying love that could even use another polish probably and being like, all right, like how? What does that look like? But we've also got that move of like, okay, why does it do that? What's the effect of that? And then we've got another sentence that starts to build out that significance as well. So I just answered the first two questions, but and kind of the third two. Do you have questions about this?
So I would say in terms of that third question, the first one could really go anywhere, which is kind of a problem with a thesis, because you could talk about any aspect of true love conquering all, both in the story and outside of it, and it would kind of answer the thesis.
Or obstacles.
Or obstacles, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could go obstacle by obstacle, in fact, and create a very lengthy list, which is not very interesting and doesn't really prove anything necessarily. Whereas the second one, it really guides you and guides the reader to know, okay, this is what we're going to talk about much more specifically and how specifically undying love is heightening this tragic outcome and showing the ridiculousness of this.
So yeah, spoiler alert, the longer right-hand one is the stronger thesis for all of these reasons. So again, getting more specific counterintuitively gives us more places to go, but also helps the reader understand what the claim is and how it's going to be constructed, which is what we want. No surprise parties. There's one lesson. No surprise parties. All right. Okay.
Right, here we are now.
Here, yes. As essentially, I didn't want you to pick number one, and then, yeah.
Nice.
So, Miguel and Java, pick one. You can work on the same one if you want. You can pick your own. Think about what the challenges are with this draft thesis, and then come up with a revision. Again, you can say that out loud. You can post it in the chat. The revisions, let's put the revisions in the chat, but if you want to talk through your thought process out loud, that's totally fine. If you want to write it out in the chat, also totally fine. But yeah, pick one, challenges, revision.
And if you don't know the text, that's okay. You can kind of come up with samples of what might be a good argument to make if that were to be useful in the text.
Yeah.
And we'll give you guys maybe 2 minutes, around 3:31 maybe. We'll look and see what you have at that point. And if you're not finished, that's fine, but we'll need to move on.
Could I like talk through it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Instead of typing in a chat.
Yeah.
So I guess the one that sort of like struck out at me was the third one. Terrorism is bad.
Mm-hmm.
And like I guess firstly because it's barely a sentence. It has 3 words.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, just like I guess sort of following the rule of not throwing your reader throwing your reader a surprise party is like that can go anywhere. It could be about what the terrorists do. It could be about how they affect like all the people that live in the original country and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And just a whole bunch of like how you said, there's just like a huge list that you can dive into that isn't really captivating the reader in any way.
Absolutely. Also, like, what evidence are we going to be using here? Can we tell?
No, not really.
Yeah, right. Like this could be like it could be a documentary. It could be anything, right?
Yeah. And I guess to sort of revise it, like it would be to, I guess, specify more what, or whoever is writing it, like to what point they're trying to make, and like for example, like if they're, instead of saying just terrorism is bad, just point out more how terrorism like not only affects the countries that get terrorized, but also the ones that are like that they originate from, the people who get displaced from terrorism, and like the economy, and just like I guess like the, I can't find the right word, but it's sort of like the living conditions, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I
Awesome.
really like where you're headed with that, Miguel. Is that you have sort of your focus is going to be on the people who are affected. You've got a couple of different ways that these people are affected, and you might not be using like a fictional text, but you might be using newspaper articles or some sort of specific event and crafting. You know, we see that terrorism is bad based on this attack in this country or in this place, based on the way that it affects these people, which is really nice.
Yeah, and what I'm also hearing is that you're thinking about how terrorism is bad not only in terms of those who are the victims of the terror attacks, but also how it illuminates the circumstances that lead to terrorism as well, which in 131 terms is almost an XY thesis, where like terrorism seems to be bad because of the victims of the terror attacks, but could also be bad because it is demonstrating the socioeconomic, et cetera, inequalities that exist in the countries that lead those people to desperate acts, things like that. So, yes.
That could easily be an essay for a end of semester, possibly a sort of thesis or a capstone paper. So that could expand massively depending on how many different ideas you bring.
Right. Or it could be like, I think there's a honors class that's on terrorism. Like it could even be like a midterm paper that's like based on 2 sources. So.
And I see that Java, you talked about number 1, and I think that's really nice. Is saying that it's blunt, it's opinion, you know, violent and bloody. I mean, so I'd say bloody maybe is a fact because there is blood, if you wanted to call it that, but violent is definitely an opinion. Some people who watch those sorts of movies might say, oh, that's not as violent as something else, so that's not really very meaningful. But if you say that it's violent and bloody based on what we know of American sort of movies in this time period, based on these 3 scenes where there's more than 18 gallons of blood being used per scene, you know, that sort of thing is kind of building up an argument that someone can then say, well, in response, well, actually, that's not that much blood, or actually, you're right. You know?
Right. It's setting up kind of a binary. So, yeah, I love the idea of putting in an example. We can also start thinking about the effects of it. Like, what does it do or show that this is so violent and so bloody? Like, is that a critique of something? Is it reinforcing certain narratives of conquest?
Or just American perceptions of cinema?
Right. Of World War II films.
Yeah.
Nazis are bad, you know, things like that. Java, what might a revision of this sound like? And by sound like, I also mean you can totally write it out. Just
whatever you feel more comfortable with.
A draft.
I think a revision would be definitely putting like the name of what the film is, and then just talking about like what happens in it and what it's about, and then maybe doing like an example of a scene of what they think could go into their paragraph or paper.
I love the idea. Sorry.
No, that's it.
Yeah, I love the idea of narrowing it down to like one scene so we can really start to unpack like, okay, yeah, so like in this film where like during the part where I haven't seen it all the way through, I will admit, but in the part where they're attacking, you know, thus and so, like this happens, which it shows or exemplifies or critiques or both reinforces and critiques, because that's usually the way of it. These things which show X, Y, or Z about which often the X, Y, or Z then is like the theme of the class. So if this is like a cinema class on the rugged American hero, right? Maybe it's even something like it stars Brad Pitt in order to evoke action heroism, but also critique excessive violence, something like that.
And I also do like, Javid, the way you're talking about, as Jennifer said, this moving from big down to small, because next week on Thursday, we'll talk about drafting. And I think you caught a lot of the aspects of an intro paragraph, is that you want to start out big, you want to talk about what is your text, what are the problems with it, or what are the things that interest you, then talk about a scene, and then get into this thesis of saying that based on all of this, we see that this movie's doing something, or it's showing something. So yeah. That's nice.
Awesome. So yeah, and the challenges that you two pointed out are essentially the challenges of all of these. So we are either stating something without really backing it up. We don't really have a sense of what the direction is, and there's an opportunity to get more specific with all of these, which therefore moves us further into argument territory and just makes it clearer for us and our reader what we're saying and where we're going with it. So, questions on any of this? All right, outlining. So this is getting towards drafting, but it's kind of like pre-drafting. Again, like I mentioned earlier, some people hate outlining, some people love it. I like it because I'm very visual, and so it's essentially a visual way of mapping out ideas. And B, it gives me a sense of accomplishment that can then motivate me towards the rest of it. So like if I'm like, I've got to write all 700 to 1,000 words right now, like that's really nerve-wracking, right? But if I'm like, you know what, today I'm going to make an outline, and then I'm going to think about it for a day, and then tomorrow I'll start on my first paragraph. It can be a way of kind of breaking things down further. Again, being kind to oneself. So it's one way of organizing thoughts. It's not the end all be all. It tends to be fairly personal. So like, just like some people like take notes with more visuals, some people take notes with more words, different styles of shorthand and whatnot. Same thing with outlines. It's basically like a note-taking / drafting system. Often, if you include more detail in that outline, it's going to be even more straightforward going into the draft, especially if you include things like topic sentences. That being said, sometimes ideas change. And so if writing out a really nice sentence and then not being able to use it is something that would be very demoralizing, maybe a more simplified outline is going to be a better way to just kind of manage that motivation aspect. So
one thing I'd like to add is you can kind of see outlines as one of the paths from this lengthy assignment sheet where you have all of these different aspects that you need to include, referencing sometimes with the strategies. We saw that you can reference other things you've already written in class. So all of these other things are mentioned. Taking that, simplifying it down to a sort of bulleted list of, I need to have a thesis, I need to connect back to what I've already written here, I need to mention this, and then sort of fleshing that out and turning it into the outline for your paper to make sure that you don't finish the whole paper and then look back and say, I needed another source. Oh, now I have to add, that somehow. Yeah,
it's a nice low stakes way of kind of checking off those different things and also making sure that the ideas fit together. And some people write better with just drafting it out first without an outline, and that's fine. Different people write different ways. This is just essentially another tool for your toolkit, as it were. Okay. Have you all had any experience with outlining? Has it been useful?
Yeah, I like to outline, especially like when it's like on a test and stuff like that. Like,
oh my gosh, right?
for
Yeah.
example, SATs.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it depends for me. Like sometimes I like it, and then other times when I like already have an idea, then I'll just want to like go into drafts. So
Yeah, absolutely. It can kind of going back to what Miguel was saying about getting in that groove, right? Like sometimes the outline just interrupts that flow for sure. So, and sometimes it can actually even be helpful after the draft. We'll talk about this a little bit more next week, but there's, it's called like a reverse outline, which essentially is you map out the ideas that you have in your draft. And so it's an outline in reverse. But it's another way of kind of just like seeing like, okay, how do these ideas fit together? Is this the most logical progression of my ideas? But yeah, I mean, sometimes it works better than others. Again, not a requirement, a tool, right? So yeah, just in general, honestly, I just use whatever's the default in the word processing system. Sometimes I pick out the ones that have like what I think of as prettier bullets points instead of just like a regular like circles. There's the one that's like the cool like diamond thing, and I'm like, ooh, that's pretty. That makes my ideas look even swankier. So sometimes I'll use that, but essentially you're thinking about what are the larger ideas and what are the smaller ideas and how do those interact? How do those stack up? How do all the ideas kind of fit together? Concept mapping can also sometimes work with this as well. So this was just one that I just came up with. You can see the diamonds make an appearance and the different like arrows and stuff. It sounds like you guys are pretty well versed in outlines though. Yes? Or do you have questions about this? It is a visual way of mapping out how the ideas fit together. Hooray. Oh, the one thing I do want to say about this though, real quick. Often in the past, at least in 131, I don't know about this next year, there's an assignment about comparison, specifically comparative analysis. One of the things that I want to highlight with this outline is that it's very tempting, especially with comparisons, to go like author by author. So it'll be like author 1, author 2, and then the comparison. That can often lead to some challenges just because there's that organization invites summary more than analysis. So essentially 3/4 of that's going to be like, here's what this person says. And then 1/4 is going to be like, here's why we care about that. And we want to move that all into the why do we care about that. So here this one is similarity first and then difference. You can also do topic by topic. So like, yes, evidence. Here's the type of evidence that Lamont uses. Here's the type of evidence that Hacker uses. And things like that. So there are different ways of approaching comparison. Try to do it by topic. Does that make sense? Yes, Ray. Okay. Great. All right. We already kind of talked about this because YouTube are rock stars. I do want to talk a little bit more about these. We'll talk through these. So yeah, so how do you organize? Like you've drafted, you're like, you know what? I'm just going to put my thoughts on paper. How do we organize it? Often going back to the thesis and just making sure that we can track that all the way through. Again, we'll talk more about this next week. Yeah, and then think the idea of the reverse outlines, like what is this paragraph talking about? And so mapping essentially this after you've written the thing. Text to speech. This slide's essentially just the preview for next week of stay tuned. And we'll talk more about that next week, but also we're happy to talk about that today if you guys want. Cool, cool, cool. All right. I'm just gonna pause right here and check on our poll to see what questions we have.
So we are also going to be looking at this document. We just sent a link. Essentially, it is two separate sample papers. One is kind of close to a typical W131 paper, and the other is more like a science / maybe sociology paper where you're collecting data. And so the idea is that just kind of take a look at them, focus on maybe just the first paragraph, since we don't have a lot of time this week to really look at everything, and we haven't talked about everything yet. Next week, we're going to come back to these papers and look at some other aspects of them, but focusing on those first paragraphs, sort of what is the thesis statement for each one? What are some problems that you see? What are some good things that you see?
And again, you can discuss that out loud or in the chat. I'm in outline mode, obviously.
I'll share this paper as well, just so that anybody who's watching
yes, good call.
Later on will be able to access it. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the sociology one, correct?
Yes. So this is the second paper. I'll start up with the first one.
So let's even just use this one. So what is our thesis statement? And what do we think about it? Or is it a trick question? What seems to be the thesis statement? Let's start there.
I think it would be the last two sentences, like starting with sweeping the planet and ending with this essay will explain.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Where are we in? Sorry, go for it.
Yeah. Only it's like, I don't know. I feel like there's something wrong with it. Like, it's not. I don't know how to put it into words, but it's not like it could be better, I could say.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we get a sense of the direction we're going, but is it an argument yet? Could someone argue against this with evidence?
Mm-hmm. And I guess
right.
there's just not really much of a claim here. It's just saying, this thing is sweeping the planet, which you can't argue. It's shutting things down, which you can't argue. And then what is coronavirus, and we'll explain. It's not really an argument so much as just saying this is something I'm going to do, but why, we don't really know.
Or even what aspects of it are we going to explain? Are we explaining what the coronavirus is, or also how it's shutting it down? So yeah, we've got a few challenges with this.
Do you want to move to the other essay and kind of look at the thesis there too?
Thing. Yeah. This time, let's hear from Java. Spreading the wealth. And again, Java, if you would like to put it in the chat, that's totally fine. So what seems to be our thesis statement here? And what are the challenges or strengths?
Would it be from not everyone knows the role to their generation?
Yeah. That's where we'd expect it, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's. I think it's like pretty good, but I'm not sure if like they can go in more detail or not.
Yeah, I mean, so with this sort of paper, it's a little bit different than maybe a 131 paper where you're not really looking at text to make a claim, you're looking at your own evidence that you collect. So I think to a certain extent, it's good that it's saying that, people don't know this song, or maybe they do, and I wanted to find that out, sure. But you're also not really explaining why this is important to know, or maybe if this song itself, is providing us with something interesting about the generation, or so there's not really a justification for why this is worth studying. And that's that sort of so what question of, okay, so I'm going to look at this, but why do we really care about this song, looking at it in this way?
And also, I think it would be useful for a reader to know what kind of a study this is, and specifically if it's quantitative or qualitative. So are we looking at numbers of people who do or do not know the song, or are we looking more at like the interviews, ethnography type of approach?
Right. It's really unclear at this point even what field this assignment is working for. Is it sociology? Is it anthropology? Is it psychology? Is it music theory? So the student is very vague as to what they're focused on.
Right, and I think Joe, you're absolutely right that there is an opportunity to specify, because what role the song played in the development of modern music, in some ways that seems like it's a book as opposed to a few page essay. So right. I think narrowing it down a little bit would be helpful. And I mean, also then less work for the student, right? Like then they don't have to account for all of modern music development. We can focus on, okay, you know, maybe in or the feelings that people have about it in the wake of this. Is it biopic or biopic? I've heard both.
I've heard biopic more recently.
Okay, whatever, the movie, right? Like maybe they're like, I did a survey in 2018 to do the thing, right? Like let's make it a little bit easier on ourselves. So awesome. Thank you both so much. Yes, excellent work with these thesis statements. All right, Mac, I'm gonna steal.
Cool. Yes, I'm going to break that off.
So we're now going to just talk a little bit about what we do at WITS. A lot of it essentially is what we've been doing. So you've gotten a little bit of a preview of it. And you have the website that Lisa put into the chat. We've also got it here. So we essentially talk to you about your writing, all writers, any stage. So if you've just gotten the assignment and you're like, I need to like talk out my ideas about this, that's awesome. I've got half a draft, I've got a full draft, this is my 4th draft. We're happy to talk about it with you. Our goal is to help you develop as a writer. So we're looking less to make like this one piece of writing beautiful. I mean, like that'd be nice, but we're focused on helping students equip themselves with tools to continue to practice writing as the skill that we've been talking about. We've got tutors in different fields. We've got undergrad tutors. Matthew and I are grad tutors. I believe we're going to be online this fall at the very least. Joanne, I don't know if you're here and can confirm that, but that was the last I heard.
Yes, we're all online all fall, for sure. We'd love to be back face to face, and maybe that'll happen in the spring, beginning whenever it is in February, when maybe students come back again to campus. But for the time being, just to keep everybody safe, we'll all be totally online in Zoom rooms, just like this one, just as well appointed and spacious and, you know, temperature controlled as this one. So come on down and see us, Java and Miguel, because Matthew and Jennifer and the other roughly 30 tutors are eager to help you. And you should also, I would say, as somebody who works at WITS, it's fine to like tutor shop, to try different tutors, because different tutors different ways. Tutors are not offended by that because we know that we are all different in certain ways. So it's cool to try out more than one tutor and even on the same paper to get multiple kinds of feedback from more than one tutor. Okay, I'm shutting up now, Jennifer.
Okay, thank you, Joe. No, yeah, thank you for the information, Joanne. Yeah, absolutely. We all have different tutoring styles, just like, you know, everyone has different styles of learning, teaching, writing, etc. And so it can only help to get multiple perspectives. And or if your style seems to work really well with one tutor, then, I mean, you can, availability permitting, you can try to keep seeing them. So, yeah, these are just general do's and don'ts. So, again, thinking about giving yourself enough time, try to budget enough time. Because we have to set up these Zoom rooms, we are closing appointments 3 hours in advance of the time. So like if you wanted like a 4 o'clock, you would need to schedule by 12:59 p.m. Especially around like midterms and finals, we do tend to fill up. So try to just, again, be planning ahead. It's most helpful to us if there are the assignment sheets and things there and ready so that we can just take a look, because again, we're not there in class with you. I mean, if you need to just access that in the meeting, it's, yeah, you know, whatever. Yes, we do. We're not open the first week of classes because I mean, people are just getting going. We're doing some training, stuff like that. Yes. Those are the main things. So yeah, essentially we're there to have a conversation with you about your writing. We're not there to like fix the paper or even like fix you. We're just, yeah, here to give our reactions, ask questions, direct your attention to certain places. There's something in the chat, but the chat window is not coming up.
Yes, and there is no cost for WITS. So it is covered with your student fees. You can make an appointment as long as you are a student at IU. You go through CAS, well, I guess it might not be CAS anymore, but the authentication service. You essentially, you know, fill out the same way that you would to get on your IU mail or anywhere else. You make your appointment with us, and the service actually has some access on the online system to the classes you're taking, so you can select your class from a drop-down menu and set everything up that way. So it's completely free, and you know, you can come in and use our services essentially as much as you feel you need throughout the semester, as long as you're an undergraduate.
Graduate student, yeah. So you get, I think, 1 appointment per day as undergraduates.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yes, well, hopefully you don't need us more than that.
Yes. If it is an essay for a test, we need a written confirmation that you're allowed to get help with it. So.
Right. So if you have some sort of assignment that a professor has said, you know, this has to be just you, you know, no help, no outside help at all, in that case, we wouldn't be able to help. But in the majority of cases, in the majority of cases, that wouldn't apply.
Yeah. But yes, completely free. All right, so just kind of sum up today. This is also what we try to do at WITS is like, all right, here are the takeaways and the next steps at the end of our 15-minute tutorials. So we talked about trying to move past the 5-paragraph structure. Again, it's not that it's inherently bad, and sometimes it does work the best. It's just we don't want to be confined to that. Writing's a skill and a process, so be patient with oneself. We talked a little bit about how to break down an assignment sheet and potentially paraphrase it, where to look for help with finding sources when that becomes something that you'll need, and some of the things that we do at WITS. Again, preview for next Thursday, we're going to get into drafting. So paragraphs, organization. We'll talk more about reverse outlining. We'll take a closer look at those sample papers, what to do with those gosh darn conclusions, revision, which is super important, really hard, but super important, and citations and formatting a little bit. All right, so the only question that I have still is how to get better practice, learn how to write better. I would say feedback from various places, roommates, teammates, WITS, professor, criticism, especially even constructive criticism, is difficult because, you know, it's writing super personal and it's a very vulnerable act. And so I think making sure that you're taking the time to kind of breathe through any initial resistance and maybe give yourself like a day to kind of process feedback, and then thinking about, okay, like what is this pointing to? How can I make this thing clearer? Reading also, I think, I guess some folks say it a lot, some folks don't, but reading all kinds of academic essays, it just kind of gets that pattern into your brain, even unconsciously. Matthew, what would your answer be to how to practice, learn how to write better?
I mean, so as we said, I think early on, we use that metaphor about sort of working out or some sort of sport. It is a skill that you sort of develop over time. So every class you take, you're going to find that it's a little bit easier, that it's a little bit more normal to sit down and write. And I think also giving yourself the time that you need. So not trying to sit down the night before and write every time, because it doesn't really develop that skill as strongly. A 1 or 2 or 3 revisions, a couple drafts, that's a chance to actually look back sort of thoughtfully at your writing and say, all right, I've noticed that every time I turn in my assignment, my professor keeps on saying, this is a problem I have. How can I address that even before I submit it, and kind of think about that usefully? And that's why I think it's a really good idea to at least give yourself a couple of days, if not a full week or 2 weeks, to kind of build out that process of writing so that there's actual steps. You outline, you think about your thesis, you think about how that's going to lead to topic sentences, and all of that eventually gets to a final paper that you can then revise and work on a couple times. And I think that takes some of the fear out of any single step, is if you have a lot of different steps of putting this paper together, instead of sitting down and writing it all in one go, and it's just, okay, well, nobody, no matter how good of a writer you are, is going to write the perfect paper on round 1. But the more you practice, the fewer drafts and the less sort of work you might have on certain things.
Or the faster the revision gets.
That's also true, yeah.
Yeah, it is on the instructor side, sometimes it's frustrating to see like, oh, this has such potential, but it's a first draft, and like it could have just used like one more round of revisions, and then it could have been even clearer. So having at least one round of revision, super valuable.
Totally.
All right, and we are just about out of time. So thank you so much for coming and participating. Yeah, and the exercises, the questions, we really, really appreciate it. And yes, all of you watching this recording as well. And we'll see you next week. Lisa, anything that we need to know about next Tuesday or anything?
Do we have any formal homework or anything like that? I can also put anything up on the Canvas site that we might need.
Oh, for this? No. This was just, no. We're just gonna dive in with another PowerPoint next week.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
I mean, if anyone does want to take a look at, so I think my internet might be going, but I was going to say, if you do want to take a look at that Google document, if either Miguel or Java or somebody else who's out there watching this, we will kind of go back to it. So anything that interests you, you can make notes of, and we can talk about it next time too.
Yes.
Sounds good. I can also include it on the site unless you guys are opposed.
That's totally fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, sounds good.
Excuse me.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
So like, I do think I will attend. I don't see any reason why I wouldn't. But say in the off chance that like I'm not able to attend next Thursday, like where would I be able to find like not only this recording but other ones? Because I have missed like past ones before. And like I tried looking for them, but I wasn't really sure where.
Okay, I can help you, Miguel. Could you put your IU email in the chat again, and I'll send you an invite and all the information.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else?
And also, if I don't see it in there right now, but Miguel, I can find your email and send that to you. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Great, I got it.
Yay. All right, perfect. All right. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone. Have a nice rest of your day. Yay.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Bye. Thank you, students.
Bye.
Bye.
Guys, appreciate it.
Thank you.